from the whole team of House Galleria, I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation and coming on our show. We are really glad that you accepted our invitation. And
Thanks for having me.
yes, it's our pleasure. So, would you like to take a minute and introduce yourself and about your studio, how it began, what are your thought process around the projects, what you do?
Sure. My name is Alireza Razavi. Our studio was started in 2008. Um, we work in 3 different locations, essentially. France, the US, and the UK. These are the 3 countries in which we have professional licenses. Our work, mostly residential, offices, and a bit of institutional. And in the past couple of years, hospitality as well, which is something that we're enjoying a lot. And ongoing projects currently, France, UK, and the US, and potentially China. And our design philosophy, I wish we had one, but I don't think we really have one set in stone. I think that what we like to do is just make sure that we listen to what each project can teach us in terms of criteria, parameters, and then offer a design solution that's not specifically taken from a style playbook or an existing typology, so to speak. So I would say pretty open, sensitive to engineering, and also maybe sensitive to our own evolution. You know, how where each project takes us and the different solutions that we develop and how we can improve them, and so on and so forth.
And Mr. Alireza, we would like to know, like, how did you yourself as a person entered into the world of designing? Like, what was your earliest inspiration? You can recall some that which inspires you to enter into this world of design.
You said earliest, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
I see. You know, I'm not sure I can specifically point to something, but I guess I've always been intrigued by you know, certain spaces and how they felt. But I can't really say, I mean, I didn't even knew it was called architecture to start with. So the way I got here is probably too complex and too long a story to tell. But I guess what we're interested now is in a way to inspire others to be involved and interested in this field, and not necessarily architects, obviously. Ideally, you would want anyone, you know, everyone to be interested in the quality of space, because this is how cities are designed and built. So the more people involved with the history and culture of construction and design, the better.
Yes. And since you have mentioned about that you started this practice in 2008, so like you have seen some major turns in the we can say in terms of the breakdown of world economy. You have seen the 2008, and then you are currently we are going through a huge pandemic which have caused a huge breakdown in the economy. So what are some of your learnings, because since you have seen these two huge breakdowns in the economy?
Sure. I saw another one before that. That was 9/11. But I guess you know, I'm not sure there's a single learning, but I mean, specifically based on a, you know, on a breakdown of this scale. But one thing that I've learned is that, you know, when you start at a smaller scale, obviously your exposure is less. So one should be careful not growing too fast. You know, I know that growth is the latest trend, so to speak, you know, and it comes with the internet culture because, you know, for obvious reasons. But I think and I think this is true of any business. When you start small and you grow gradually as opposed to exponentially, I think you get to learn your business better. You get to master your business better. And yeah, pandemic or not, there's ups and downs in any business. So because architecture, I think, is so much about who you work with, your team, you need to protect your team, because without them, there's not much you can do, So for me, I guess my experience with all these breakdowns that you've mentioned is that what needs to happen is that you need to protect your core team, because this is how, without them, you cannot produce anything. So and I guess 2001 was more radical, but because I used to live in New York back then, and everything stopped, and so yeah, I mean, I learned from these experiences, and I guess what I learned the most was protect your team, and that happens at a variety of levels.
Mm,
Protecting your
mm,
income, you're making sure your
mm,
projects are
mm,
well handled, and
mm,
well serviced, because
mm,
this is how clients come back to you. So yeah, I wish there
mm.
was a single answer to your question, but ultimately you need to just make sure that you survive these crises, and because the world has obviously been through much more severe breakdowns, so this one will come to pass as well.
I'm sure. And you just mentioned one very good thing, that the internet culture have brought something which is very negative in terms, because everyone is looking for exponential growth, and there are very few people who are looking for the gradual growth. And do you think that there is a huge like when we are going and looking at the youth of the design industry, so most of them are quite depressed because they're expecting too much to happen the first 2 years, 3 years. Do you think that there is a huge reason of this internet culture behind this depression?
Well, maybe, maybe, but it's true that somehow, and I'm not really sure when, there something happened that this profession, that which traditionally was a profession in which you needed to wait a bit before reaching for maturity, inverted itself, and it became about up and coming designs, which is perfectly fine. The problem with that is that architecture is, as you know, very complex. It has multiple layers to it. And in order to master all these layers, I know of no other solution than time. You need to build the building, and buildings take time. So frankly, I'm still very much convinced that in order for you to become an accomplished architect, you need to be patient.
Yes. And you just mentioned that architecture have some layers which need to be mastered, and it does take time. So would you like to elaborate a bit on that point, like what exactly, like what layers you are mentioning here?
Sure. I think you need to first understand that you are, as an architect, unlike, say, a painter or a sculptor, you're not independent. You are providing to someone's needs, your client. That client has a budget, has a site. There's a set of constraints. There's laws, urban planning, DOB, etc. So I think when you're young, you're obviously, you want to, you're in some ways idealistic, and you don't want to compromise with your designs. And learning to compromise, I think, is the most challenging aspect of it, because compromise is perceived as a negative situation, whereas without compromise, there cannot be anything, in life in general, but specifically in architecture. But all of these things are not taught at school, obviously, So that's a fundamental layer, and that, maybe some people have the maturity to understand it faster than others, but then obviously there's the structural part of a building. Buildings obviously need to stand up, but structure in itself is a field that's immensely vast and fascinating. So I think mastering structural techniques, to me, is a fundamental part of design. your building should essentially be able to speak for itself, you know, and explain to some extent how it's been built and how it stands. I think this is how architecture gains strength, you know. And of course, there's, you know, every year there's a new layer, you know. Technology adds a new layer every 6 months. So you need to some extent to master, not fully, but, you know, to some degree, all these layers. And, you know, there's so many of them, from lighting design to mechanical design to passive design. But yeah,
Yes.
I would say that structure and learning to navigate your own design agenda and your clients are fundamental ones.
Yes. And you mentioned the technology is changing every 6 months, and we need to kind of adapt the new technologies which are coming. So if I talk about you as a person, that do you take this conscious decision that every technology, new technology which is coming in any domain, that you are going and you are learning in order to integrate those technologies in your projects?
Well, we try and do our best, you know. Obviously, it's impossible. I mean, first of all, not all projects, you know, require the same type of technologies. But obviously, we try and master the most fundamental ones, you know, heating, cooling, data, power. Um, but, you know, I guess the main issue or the main challenge with architecture is that, unlike the car industry, you cannot prototype a building entirely. I mean, there's actually a few companies that are trying to do that now, but it's very difficult to prototype a 100-story tower. You know,
Yes.
you design it, you engineer it, you know, you do your best to interior design it, and then you build it. You know, and so there's no prototyping it, and so as such, the construction industry has always been at risk. You know. So I guess that as far as softwares go, that's where we tend to be more, you know, have our ears open. You know, which are the softwares or the techniques, the protocols that would allow us to minimize and ideally have them disappear. You know, minimize the impact of unforeseen conditions, and just the, you know, the level of detailing that you can provide in a set of drawings, you know, because, you know, the architect designs and prepares a drawing package, the engineer inputs his part, these all end up in different drawing packages, or in this, you know, they're centralized in a 3D model. But, you know, you can't just press a button and have that structure
Yes.
happen. So
Yes.
this is the area that interests me most, I guess, in the coming years, is how the industry will evolve to minimize the gap between a set of drawings and the building itself.
Yes. You're right. And would you like to give us a little bit of brief about your personal process? Like, suppose when a client comes to you, so like, how did you start the project? Like, you start with the research, or you start with the questions? Like, what is your personal process which you always goes through, which is standard in all the projects you do?
Right. You know, yeah, we have a process which goes through a set of questions to the client, analyzing that feedback, and, you know, programs, etc. But, you know, and most architecture studios have some sort of a similar process. There's one thing that really cannot be sort of boiled down to a set of questions, and that's inspiration. You know, so you need to spend enough time on a project, you know, to have some sort of an inspiration that guides you, and I still believe that's the fundamental part. It's certainly the fun part, you know. So so yeah, there is no matrix for inspiration. You know, it can come from. It doesn't necessarily come looking at your screen or at a sketch, or, you know, you never know when it hits. But it needs to mature, and but it probably comes from a blend of history what you've seen before that you cannot even recall, you know, your own data bank of images and experiences, and then it sort of happens, you know.
And this is very interesting because what you explained 2 minutes ago, that some companies are trying to do prototyping of the buildings, and then I'm talking to someone who have practiced architecture for decades, and now you are saying that inspiration can come from anything. Do you think that this is also going to be a major fallback for the companies who are trying to create the prototype, because there is no process? How can you prototype something which don't have defined process?
Right. Well, you see, there's there are so many ways to practice architecture, obviously, you know. This is what I'm interested in, but of course it's by no means universal. Others would be interested in a more, you know, different angle, different approach to architecture. There's no doubt that artificial intelligence will ultimately take over, you know, and just feeding the machine with a set of criteria, you know, square footage, height, whatever, can produce a design, you know, and this will obviously be interesting. Um, I think that, you know, architecture cannot exist without technology or technique. Actually, you know, mankind could not exist without technique or tools, right? I mean, if we're around, it's because, you know, whatever, 2 million years ago, some of us invented a set of tools.
Yes.
So we'll always rely on them, you know. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see what AI can come up with as far as you know, integrating all these processes. But as far as I'm concerned, yeah, I think that the you know, this intuition part is probably the most interesting, not the most interesting part, but one of the most exciting parts, you know, because then translating that intuition into something that's possible, that's feasible, is also fascinating, you know.
Yes.
And that also is the essence of architecture. I mean, architecture per se is a fairly recent phenomena, you know. But before that, you know, I mean, whatever, China's been building for 10,000 years, India for 7, you know, whatever. So, and there was no such thing as an architect. It was a set of competences that were put together. And you know, yeah, what I'm interested in right now is more, until AI kicks in, is really how all these different steps of architecture um, can happen.
Do you think that according to your understanding on AI, that if even if AI kicks in, like it will go hand in hand with the architects, or it will completely take over? What's your personal thought on this?
Well, you know, it's like BIM today.
Mm.
You know, sure, BIM has made a few things easier. You know, you don't need to draw your plans first and then your sections and then your elevations. You're just, you know, focusing on a single model. But what's my, let's just put it this way. Um, BIM hasn't affected my approach to design, you know. Um, just the way, you know, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, everyone sort of predicted that, you know, 3D would revolutionize design and architecture. The bottom line is that it hasn't. You know,
Yes.
there's maybe a niche part of architecture that heavily relies on it, but it's essentially stylistic. It's a formalistic approach. You know, but that revolution didn't happen. You know, it didn't happen in our construction methods. It didn't happen in our. You know, you still need to have someone manning the software and etc. So full automation of the design process, yeah, I mean, I'm sure maybe, I mean, I'm not sure actually. Maybe it happens in different in other fields, and it'd be interesting to see, you know, what the outcome is. But when that happens in architecture, I mean, first of all, maybe it won't be called architecture anymore.
Yes.
Um, I don't know. We'll see.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
We'll
And
see is the safe answer.
yes, that's the most safest answer you can come up with, because it's something completely unpredictable, because you can't predict anything what AI can come up with in next 10 years. And Mr. Alireza, you are your partner in 3 offices in 3 different locations. How much do you think is the importance of having the characteristic of not just of an architect or of an artist, but if you're running a studio, you need to have a sense of what running a business is. How much do you think that those characteristics we need to develop in our personality in order to run something like what you are doing?
Oh, listen, absolutely. You know, I went to school in 3 different countries and I don't know, 4 different architecture schools. I hardly recall anyone telling us about, you know, running a business. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's key. You know, you need to have a sound management of your office, because if there is no business, there is no architecture, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's as simple as that. So
Yes.
so you need to make sure that it's a viable business, and that is key. It's key. You know, of course, I didn't know this, and I certainly, had I heard it when I was 20 years old, I would have maybe rejected it, because you know your primary focus at 20 when you're studying architecture is not business. At least that's not why most of us went into architecture. But yeah, I mean, of course, it's if this is how you make a living, then it needs to work, right?
Yes.
Because otherwise it just puts too much strain on you and your team, and it doesn't work.
Yes, and I think this is one of the biggest reason we see that so many artists who are very good at their art and they are still struggling in the industry, because they like these things are also very hard to master over the time. That it's I can't see that there are a handful of people who can go on and run their studios in multiple location. It's a different trade to master, I guess.
Yeah, and again, keep in mind that none of what we did happened overnight. You know,
Yes.
we started small.
Yes.
And when you start small, you grow gradually. All these things, you have more time to integrate these processes. You know, of course, if you're to, you know, start a business and have multiple locations overnight, it's a different deal. You know, you need investors, you need more competences, but it wasn't our choice, you know. And so when you do things, you know, at your own speed, well, it gives you time to come up with your own management style, and you know, and see what's possible for you and where you can thrive.
Yes. And how much do you think that because what I've seen so far is that the people who go and work in a studio for a significant amount of years, they tend to be much better in these things because they have seen the processes day and night. And how much do you think that it is important for a young architect especially to go out and at least spend 5 to 10 years, if not 5 to 10 years, at
Right.
least significant amount of time in order to learn the processes of taking the project from point A till the completion of the project?
Listen, and I can only speak for myself, obviously, but for me, it was key. You know,
Mm.
I worked in other offices, I don't know, probably for a little less than 10 years. And I would not have been able to accomplish what I accomplished had I not done that before, you know. But I'm sure others, you know, and I know of examples, you know, of architects graduating and starting their own firm the next day, you know, and it has worked out well for them. So I think you really need to know yourself. You know, you shouldn't sort of follow someone else's path. You know,
Yes.
you should go where you feel you will find knowledge and comfort, and you know. So for me, it was key. It was key to travel, and it was key to learn. You know, traveling and learning from others. You know, and you don't necessarily learn what to do, you also learn what not to do, you know.
Yes.
And it's equally important, equally
Yes.
important, you know.
Yes. And
So yeah, I mean, my recommendation is, you know, working for others.
yes.
You know, it gives you it doesn't give you a head start, because you know, you could sort of obviously say that those who start their offices, but ultimately it is a head start, because you know, we all run into hurdles, you know, in life and work. And when you've seen these hurdles before being managed by Others, well, that's what I call a head start, because you've seen it before, you know it's not impossible to find a solution, you know, then you're better off.
Yes. And so far I have talked to a lot of people, and I think many people suggest this, because one of my very good real estate developer friend, and he always suggests that he have tried many designers on his project, and he said that the people who have spent significant of amount of time working on projects with someone else, with someone more experienced, they are much more clear with the process and they can handle things better. So maybe what you are saying, of course, you are just not generalizing the whole thing, but still I think this
Yeah,
can be said a good advice for youngsters.
I think so too. You know, I think so
Yes.
too. And again, maybe the profession will change and maybe technology will evolve, but um, but I don't think there is value in you know, I don't think youth is. I mean, I would have to think how to express this accurately, but how could I say it? There's definitely value in time, you know, and definitely. Um, and again, you know, I say this because I'm 49, whatever, but you know, I'm sure I would not have probably accepted it
Yes.
when I was 20.
Yes.
But this is why you're interviewing me. So
Yes. And if I ask you that, when I said that we when we see this generation, they are a little bit less patient with the time, that they just want to everything to happen overnight. When you were in your 20s, or in your early 20s or mid 20s, you were also something like this, that you wanted things to happen fast, or you were always like this? Like, how was it with you?
I think you know, I I wanted to find myself in a position where I would be controlling the design. But it back then, and at least for me, it didn't really matter what the environment would be. Would it be someone else's office or my own office? That wasn't my primary focus, you know. I mean, I think what I was very conscious of is that when I graduated from school, I could not have built a building by myself, you know. So I was very aware that I needed to go through this experience with someone else, with a team, to understand all the variables, you know. So so no, I wasn't specifically eager or in a rush to put my name on a specific design, or put my name on a, you know, on the front door, so to speak.
Yes. And you just mentioned that while you were speaking a couple of minutes ago, that traveling has been an important thing in your life as an architect. Like, could you elaborate this point a bit, that how traveling have
Sure.
seasoned you as a designer?
Well, you know, I think that regardless of your profession, traveling is essential, you know, and it helps build you know, who you are. And the one great thing about traveling is that you learn to lose your certainties. You know, you learn that others come up with answers to the same problems, but from a different path, from a different angle. And that's extremely important in life, you know. So, you know, you sort of lose these certainties that you may have. Then, of course, it's, you know, culturally, which is the continuation of that first answer, culturally, it's, you know, there's no substitute for traveling. You know, reading books is great, you know, watching films is great, but as far as I'm concerned, traveling tops it all. Um, so yeah, and as an architect, traveling has allowed me to see that there were things that were possible in other countries, which I was told were not possible in another country. This happens to me, you know, at least once a week, even now. And so it's important for me to make sure that, I can answer, I can tell a client, don't worry, it hasn't been done, in France, but it's been done in Switzerland,
Mm.
and rain behaves pretty much the same. Rain doesn't take frontiers into account necessarily, or snow, so this has been extremely important for me, extremely important, being open to what others do and how they do it, why they do it.
And Mr. Razavi, since you mentioned that earlier when you started, you just wanted your control over the design. But since now you are running a large scale studio, so to say,
It's not a large scale. We're not SOM or
N- but,
APF.
but still you're pretty much managing three offices and you're working on a pretty much good scale. So how much of your personal time today goes into actual designing part?
Well, way more than before, believe it or not. Because as you grow, and as, again, it's all about the team, right? The more trust you can put into your team, the more time you have, and so that's why it's, building a team is just a fundamental part of this exercise. So I guess that, I'm way more involved in design than I was in the earlier years, definitely, and I'm enjoying it far more.
And now if I ask you how much of your personal time goes in building the studio, like what would you say about that?
Oh, building the studio is is an ongoing process. This is something that I think of every day. It's just like athletes that are, even when they're ranked number one, they're constantly thinking of improving themselves. So we're constantly thinking about how to improve our processes, ourselves, our knowledge, traveling, what to do, etc. So that's an ongoing topic. We
Yes,
never cease to think about that. And it
yes.
goes from literally our workspace to contractors, techniques,
Mm,
etc.
mm,
Um, and as far as design specifically, I
mm,
I would think that, as an architect, you never, and this is a bit of a cliche, but it's true, you never really stop thinking about the design, because you're constantly aware of your environment,
mm.
and your environment, even if you live in nature, is a constant source of information for an architect. So, but as far as, taking a pencil and drawing, um, I would say, yeah, a couple of hours a day, easy.
And if I don't talk about the studio or the team, if I talk about specifically like you as a person, like do you think a few things consciously in order to improve yourself? Because you are not just an artist, you are an entrepreneur who are doing multiple things, you are an architect, so you are playing multiple roles with multiple disciplines. So are there something which you practice consciously, almost on sort of quarterly or monthly basis to improve yourself?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, beyond the sort of imposed self training that that you have to have for your professional licenses, I guess what I would like to do more is probably probably draw more, but not necessarily architecture itself. I would like to paint more, I would like to draw more, because it's a way of keeping your brain and hand connected. Um, but it's but maybe drawing is also important for an architect, in the sense that um, ultimately this is some form of poetry, and to me, at least, drawing's always been important. And because in the early years when you start your office, your practice, you don't really have time for this. Since I've sort of being more involved with drawing, I'd like to be more rigorous about it. And maybe I'm not rigorous enough. I should sort of yeah, that's one thing that I would like to do more, draw more,
Mm,
but not, again, not necessarily architecture driven.
mm. And Mr. Razavi, there is a very big chunk of our viewers who are the young artists, young architects who are still struggling in their earlier phase of life. Of course, the one thing is that certain times we are having some expectation which might eventually turn into a burden, which is stress, of course. But do you think that as a seasoned architect, maybe you can suggest or you can guide something or you can give a piece of advice for someone who's still in their earlier phase of like they just ventured out 6 months or 10 months ago and they don't have the enough projects, they don't know how to maintain the clients. Would you like to suggest something?
Wow, obviously, not giving up, that's the key. And any profession, because it's, we all have multiple opportunities to give up, every day. So not giving up is already half the job. And then, I think that, again, this may seem like a cliche, but it's been true for me. You learn more when you fail than when you, again, quote unquote, succeed, because the definition of success is more difficult. Are you successful because you're making money? Are you successful because you have an award, or because you're happy, or but failure is often more brutal and immediate. So so one should not be afraid of failing, and again, failing has been, I mean, I can easily say that I've failed more often than I've succeeded, and that's where all the knowledge came from. The bottom line is not to give up after you fail.
Yes, yes, yes. And if possible, would you like to share one or two experience where you think that it was in that moment it was a big failure, but eventually you have turned things up?
Sure. Well, I think the most typical failures in architecture are losing a project. Regardless of how you lose it. Do you lose it because you lose the competition, you lose the client, or you lose the job because your client is not satisfied with the design, or there's multiple ways of losing, but they all hurt the same way. They hurt your ego, because ultimately, as an architect, you feel as though your design is not good enough. And so I think that, yeah, the times where we have failed, be it in competitions, or losing a client because another design was preferred over ours, those are probably the ones that hurt the most. But you also realize that with time they hurt less and less.
Mm.
So again, you have to stick to it.
And when we talk to any artist or any architect, they always says that it is not my 20th project or it's not my 21st project. It's that every project have been like the stroke of paint, that I have get seasoned with every project. Do you think that this happens with you also, that with every project you are just getting better and better and better?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, we are. Yeah, every project you improve as you go, and of course all the projects are different for a set of reasons, and so there's new parameters in every project, but you essentially learn to you grow more confident, and confidence, I think, sort of infuses everything, and as you're more confident, the relationship with the team evolves, the relationship with the client and the consultants and everything evolves, so and again, confidence, if you can acquire it overnight, great, but it usually takes time.
Yes. And like, do you have any experience where it takes a reservoir of confidence for you to probably overcome a challenge, which is sort of design challenge, like you were doing a project and you felt that, oh my God, that it's uh, very hard or impossible to do this particular thing, and still when you're looking 5 year down the line, you feel so good about it?
Yeah, I think we've worked on a project that lasted, a few years, and it was a challenge at every turn. Um, I think that, you know, as far as long as you are not putting your practice at risk, and or your client's schedule and, you know, goals, you know, there is a material solution to any set of problems that is put forward in architecture and construction. So so yeah, I mean, there are projects for which we've taken, you know, we've invested in an unbelievable amount of time to come up with the right solution, but also maybe we felt, because we felt that it was worth it, you know, that we didn't want to give up, and that you know, we just couldn't come up with the right solution overnight. So yeah, there's definitely some projects are extremely challenging and they take more time, and at times you even have to accept to lose money on those jobs, but the outcome, you know, a few years down the line is extremely rewarding.
Yes. And if I sort of speak of today's time, what this pandemic is going on, and you have a very unique situation where you have the view on both France, where we can see the second wave emerging now, and the US also. Like, how do you see the market probably a year from now? Do you see that there will be certain changes in it, or do you see that there will be certain disadvantages or advantages for architects? How do you see it?
Right. And listen, I wish I could answer that, but I really don't know.
Mm,
I mean, it seems as though China is doing better
mm,
um, and dealing with the issue and coming out of it.
mm.
But who knows what will happen a year from now? I
Yes.
think the U.S. is also doing pretty good, maybe despite what people think. Um, but how this will affect architects, that's very tough to say.
Mm. Okay, Mr. Razavi, now we're in the final part of this podcast. So in this, because the whole session is a little bit more towards the intellectual side, so make it a little bit entertaining. We ask, this is a rapid fire round which we does with our guest. So in which we give you two options, and very quickly you have to select one option. So I mean, you must have played that game, this or that, in which you select one option.
Okay,
So should we start?
sure.
Okay, Paris or New York?
Paris,
Okay. BMW or Mercedes?
Mercedes,
Okay. Contemporary or modernism?
modernism,
Okay. Zaha or Norman Foster?
Norman,
Okay. Lamborghini or Ferrari?
Ferrari.
Okay. It was a nice talking to you, Mr. Razavi. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And
You're welcome.
we are really grateful for you to be on our show. And I
Great,
hope that our viewers will enjoy it as much as I enjoy talking to you.
absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so
Uh,
much.